Do you feel like you guys have tried everything? I mean, there's been load managing in the past, and this season you guys were like, hey, we're going to take it more seriously, and we're going to play every game in condition, and you guys did that until the guys got hurt, and it's kind of like the same result. You guys just can't stay healthy in the postseason. Does it feel like you guys have tried everything?
Yeah, yeah.
I know we've talked about it a lot, but it is one of the biggest trades of our era. But officially 5 years later, that Thunder Clippers trade is one of the biggest fleece of the decade and possibly ever. Now, obviously context matters. You can't just look at that trade technically because Paul George basically got traded solely for one of the best rebuilds that I've ever seen. But we know it wasn't just Paul George. Kawhi was basically involved in this package because I don't think he goes to the Clippers if this trade doesn't fall through. But 5 years later, I'm sorry, it's an absolute disaster. And what makes it worse is the current success of now OKC. Right now, as I record this video, OKC is tied 2 games apiece with Dallas, the team that the Clippers just got sent home by. Yes, it was no Kawhi, but it's never any Kawhi. That's a given. If OKC happens to beat Dallas, which I'm not predicting, I picked Dallas to win that series and they should have won game 4. But if OKC wins, not only did they advance against a team that might have just broken up your 5-year experiment, they would have made it just as far as the Clippers did with that Jordan-Pippen 2.0 duo. Even through a 5-year rebuild, that's insane. I remember this article by Forbes right after the Clippers blew that 3-1 lead against the Nuggets in the bubble, and it basically talked about how that massive trade can actually resemble another one of the worst trades of the decade, the Brooklyn Celtics trade. Yeah, you might look at it and say, nah, no way. Kawhi and Paul George, they were way younger at the time. The trade made way more sense, and they made a conference finals, slightly more success. But to me, it's really becoming a stalled out version of that Brooklyn debacle 10 years ago. And who cares if you maintain relevancy that always ended up in massive disappointment? If you celebrate that, that's the most Clippers thing ever. Brooklyn went all in, had a bunch of names for 1 year, whereas the Clippers did it for 5. But the results are damn near identical. Both trades resulted in the team that basically fleeced them kicking off some of the greatest rebuilds of our era, and that's simply a fact. 4 years post the Boston trade, Boston was the first seed in their conference. 5 years post the OKC trade, OKC is the first seed in their conference. Now, the Clippers, they're stuck with the 34-year-old Paul George, who's probably about to opt out of his contract. A bad contract with Kawhi. I love Kawhi, but that's a bad contract, and I have no idea why they did that early. And no real results from this hopeful duo, but disappointment and flash in the pan ass moments. And Paul George, he's right. They tried everything. When Kawhi and PG first got there, they were heavy on the load management stuff because Kawhi was fresh off of that method with Toronto. That didn't work. And the only time we seen Kawhi healthy through a full playoffs was in a bubble off a 4-month layoff. That's not real. This year they played more than ever and they had great moments, but it ended with their best player not being there when you needed him most. This stuff, it just didn't work. The window to me to really maximize the dominance of LeBron and Anthony Davis as a duo, bro, that's over. Not to hone in or trash Russell Westbrook in any way, but that Russ trade for the Lakers, it always frustrated me because it ruined prime years of what could have been with that duo. Now, AD couldn't stay healthy through those years, so we probably wouldn't have been able to see it anyway. But when they won that championship in 2020, it was such a hand-in-glove fit with the right pieces surrounding them. As great of a passer LeBron has always been, he averages 10 assists and leads the NBA in assists their first year together. Anthony Davis has an absolute dominant postseason run. They won a championship. It just felt perfect. Even the following season, fresh off the shortest offseason ever for a champion, they were in prime position to, who knows, win it again before injuries derailed their year. But unfortunately for them, the West since then, it's completely changed. Their first 2 to 3 years together, in my opinion, was their window to win, mainly because of how significantly weaker the West was at that time. In their first year together where they won that championship, the Lakers had the best record in the West, by far the best point differential in the West, and not trying to take away anything they accomplished in that season. But if you remember that specific year, it was really a two-man race between the two LA teams. Dame was putting up heroic performances in dead-ass Portland. Houston, they had 2 ball hogs and their average height lineup was like 6'5". We knew that wouldn't work. Jokic and Murray, they were very young back then. The Jazz, their second best player was Rudy Gobert. Steph and Kevin Durant, they were out the conference. It was a perfect window for LeBron and Anthony Davis to capitalize, and they did for 1 year. Now, It's not like that. And you know it's not like that because LeBron and AD, they both had really good regular seasons. They both, to me, played well in the playoffs. Look at their numbers this year versus the year they won the championship. LeBron was averaging 10 points in the fourth quarter versus Denver in this series on high-ass efficiencies. I don't care that he missed one wide-open shot in game 2 that probably could have changed the series. He played well. Anthony Davis averaged his career high in the playoffs in rebounds, assists, and field goal percentage. Could he have been more aggressive in the fourth quarter? Yeah, but I know what AD is, and you really couldn't ask for more out of your two best players. To me, they lost because they continued to allow Denver to go on these massive runs where they got extremely cold and Denver got extremely hot, specifically MPJ. If you look at the first halves of the first round, the Lakers damn near led the playoffs in point differential with a plus 38. They lost because, well, in the second half, they were damn near at the bottom with a minus 49 plus differential. I believe in all of their losses, they had like a 12-point plus lead. They led the series for like 70% of the time. They weren't outmatched. They just couldn't finish. And going back to LeBron and Anthony Davis, to me, they could have beaten any one of these Western Conference teams, not named Denver. Minnesota definitely would have been tough, but I feel like LeBron, with his experience, he would have won the chess match with Anthony Edwards. The problem is they're in the West. We had 10 teams, 10 games above 500 for the first time ever. The Lakers, they don't get the benefit of having a good first, second round matchup because they're an older team that drags out the regular season and that hurts them. And the West is only getting better. Ja's back next year. Houston, they have another top pick. Wemby, he's insane. To me, that window is just closed even with how good those two are. For them to win now, everything kind of has to be perfect. And it's never really been that way for LeBron. The Miami Heat, they're a team that's, to me, in a pretty similar situation. As much success as they've had, they've peaked. You could tell Pat Riley in his interview last week, he was frustrated, taking jabs at their best player, Jimmy Butler, and calling Tyler Hero fragile. But to me, a lot of it, bro, it's your fault. I respect the culture. Everybody respects Heat culture. It's obviously a proven thing that works. But Pat Riley specifically, he's relied way too much on culture in despite of talent. I don't even get how you can be mad at Jimmy, even if you are a little annoyed with his comments, because you're the one that's failed him in his 5 years there, and he's maximized that opportunity. Bad contract after bad contract, deadline after deadline where you make no moves, free agency after free agency where you make no moves. Kyle Lowry at like 36 years old, he gets a massive deal and it never worked out. Duncan Robinson, he's still owed $19 million next year. I know he had a bad back and he is good for your spacing, but this year in the playoffs, he wasn't really there. Tyler Hero, he's taking up a lot of your cap, and I know he's young, he's only 24 years old, but he's injured a lot. He's underperformed in his last 2 healthy playoffs. The only rock they've had to me outside of Jimmy Butler has been Bam. So now next year, you're basically going to have the exact same core because a lot of these guys, they're still under contract. This year, they traded for Terry Rozier, and I always questioned the fit because he never really felt quite like Heat culture, especially coming out of Charlotte. But I said, okay, they're aggressive. It really didn't work out. He was injured and he hasn't really played well. He's owed a lot of money next year. Next season, and I feel like I say this every single year, Miami has the 4th highest payroll in the league, and they still feel like they lack talent. If you look at the other top 4, top 5 teams as far as payrolls next year, even if they are a shit show, they're at least a top heavy team with 2 to 3-ish stars on max deals. Miami just doesn't feel like that. Talent is still what they lack, yet their salary cap is one of a team with a bunch of talent. Now, in 2024, going on 2025, now with Jimmy Butler, now that you haven't maximized him, you're kind of in a dilemma. What do you do with him now? He's about to be 35 with basically 1 year left on his deal. As great as he is, and I love Jimmy, unless you really want to set your franchise back, I don't know if you can extend him to another long-term deal that will end when he's like 38, 39. I'm sorry, it's business, and Jimmy hasn't been the most healthy. Unfortunately, it feels like whatever was to come from the Jimmy Miami Heat era, y'all didn't maximize, and now in 2024, it peaked. Definitely won a lot of games, made 2 finals, I believe 3 conference finals off of grit, culture, Eric Spoelstra, Pat Riley, Jimmy, all that. But it just feels like you squeezed all the juice left out of that lemon. The Philadelphia 76ers, they're unfortunately another team that's made terrible moves over the years, and it possibly jeopardized their stars window. Joel Embiid is now 30. Joel Embiid's 30 feels like 35. This man's body, his face, his legs, his knees, his back, it's just been through it. Even coming into the league, I've never even seen this man healthy for a full playoff run, and that's unfortunate. With that being said, a lot of the financial moves, even some of the draft moves Philly made, it completely destroyed this prime window of Joel Embiid. Now, not to absolve Joel Embiid for terrible, and I mean terrible performances in the playoffs. Let's not get it twisted. Last year versus Boston, I watched the MVP get locked up in pivotal moments versus Al Horford. I didn't see those statement games like I just seen from Jokic in game 4 and 5. This man picked game 7 last year versus Boston to have his worst game of his whole season. So Joel Embiid, he deserves his share too. But some of their draft moves and who they decided to pay over the years, it really destroyed what looked like it possibly could have been special 5 years ago. I'm not killing them for this move because literally anybody would have done it in that moment. But they basically signed Ben Simmons to the contract of death. He got that money and basically quit basketball. They traded him for another player that damn near put them through the exact same thing. Then that Tobias Harris contract. Bro, I'm sorry, but it ended so damn poorly. This playoffs, and this stat absolutely blew my mind. You know how they have that stat per 36 minutes to see exactly what pace a player is actually on? Well, scratch that. Let's look at players that actually played 36 minutes in these playoffs. Out of every player that averaged 36 minutes, like Tobias Harris, Tobias is the only player that averaged single digits. This man is making $40 million a year. Next year, the only good part is all the bad contracts are basically done. The only contract they really have left is Joel Embiid. But that basically means you kind of have to have the perfect offseason. And if you don't, how much time do you even have left with Joel Embiid? Do you want to reboot? That's the question they have to answer. The New Orleans Pelicans, a team that I've always liked, but they have to 100% blow this big three up. This experiment from the jump is quickly turned into a massive disappointment. One of the deepest teams in the league with two-way young wings that I like. I like Willie Green, but their top 3 guys, let's be honest, they're all very unreliable. Zion Williamson, I'm sorry, he's a very talented player, but the facts are the facts. He can't stay healthy and he's never consistently in the best shape. His team, since he's been there, they played 10 playoff games. He's never been a part of one. It's been 5 years. I'm sorry, he's proven he cannot be your best player because he's simply not there enough. Brandon Ingram, we don't talk about him enough because Zion's typically hurt and he gets the headlines for it because of his weight, but he is too. In his last 3 years, he's played 55 games, 45 games, and this year 64 games. I respect him for coming back this year just in time for the playoffs, but I talked about Tobias Harris and how he was probably the worst player in the playoffs that actually played. Brandon Ingram was a close second. Out of every player that shot as many times as Brandon Ingram did in the playoffs this year, he was by far the most inefficient. Again, probably wasn't healthy, but that's why I said this big three is not really reliable. This team, and it feels tough to say this because they're extremely deep and they just had their second best record literally in their franchise's history, but they don't feel like they have that top alpha reliable guy. You want it to be Zion, you drafted him to be that, but he's simply not there enough, and it's tough. And lastly, and it's tough for me because this is my era, but we officially hit that crossroad in eras. Now it's finally up for the old heads and on to the young generation to carry the rest of the 2020s. The sole old vet star now left in the playoffs is Kyrie Irving. That's crazy. I remember when Kyrie was the young guy beside LeBron, but all of my childhood heroes, they went home early this year. Steph, he couldn't even get in the playoffs. LeBron, he's out in the first round. Kevin Durant, he tried another super team and got bounced by a 22-year-old. Kawhi, he can't even get on the court anymore in April. Paul George, he's home doing podcasts. Jimmy Butler, he's home telling us what he would have done. It's officially out with the late 2000s, early 2010s era and on to the late 2010s, early 2020s era. Like, it's here now. If you guys made it this far, don't just leave the video, like the video and comment what's been the most surprising thing of the playoffs so far. To me, it's been Jalen Brunson. Like, Jalen Brunson has been going insane consistently, especially in New York. There will be a part 2, so stay tuned for that. Follow my social media sites, turn on all my post notifications, do all that great stuff, guys. And until next time, as always, stay tuned.